They told you history is carved in stone, but that's a lie. What you've been given is a painting, carefully framed, deliberately lit, so you never see the shadows crawling just beyond the gilded edge. And if you've ever wondered why, it's because the shadows are where the truth lives. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine the sound of silk whispering across marble floors. A faint perfume lingers, jasmine, musk, and fear. You are standing at the threshold of the Mughal imperial harem. To the poets, this was paradise, a palace of beauty, music, and luxury. But to the women who lived here, it was a cage woven with gold. The harem was not a single room, it was a hidden world within the empire, sealed from the public eye. Behind those walls, hundreds of women, concubines, wives, servants, existed under one truth. Their worth began and ended with the pleasure and favor of one man, the emperor. But here's the part they never taught you in school. This was not just about lust. This was about control. The harem was a political machine disguised as a paradise, where a woman's body was currency, and her silence was the tax she paid to survive. The rules were absolute. No man except the emperor could even see these women, under penalty of death. The corridors were guarded by eunuchs, men stripped of their manhood so they could guard the empire's treasures without corruption. The irony? They too were prisoners, chained not by walls, but by what had been taken from them. Some concubines entered this world by force, kidnapped from distant lands, traded like goods, or gifted by nobles seeking favor. Others were born into it, never tasting freedom even once. And once inside, the line between queen and corpse was thinner than silk. Favor could make you powerful overnight. A whisper against you could end with poison in your sherbet. What you are about to hear is not the fairy tale, it is the nightmare that lived beneath it. Because when beauty is trapped, it begins to rot. And in the rot, you find the kind of truth that empires are built on, and the kind that destroys them. Are you ready to walk through the gates? Once we enter, there is no way back. The first thing you notice when the gates close behind you is the silence. Not the peaceful kind. This is the silence of people who know they are being watched. Every glance, every breath, measured. The harem's beauty was a mask, but its bones were iron, strict hierarchies carved into daily life. At the top sat the Padshah Begum, the emperor's chief wife or his most favored queen. She was untouchable, her words carrying weight beyond the harem's walls. Beneath her, concubines fought for a place in the emperor's bed, because one night of favor could elevate them above all others. But here's the poison inside the honey: elevation meant survival, for a time. When you fell from favor, you didn't just fall into obscurity, you fell into danger. To keep the women compliant, the harem fed them with dreams. Silks, jewels, and music distracted from the truth. They were property. And when property breaks, it is replaced. A concubine who displeased the emperor could vanish without a word, her body quietly buried in the gardens she once walked in beauty. But here's the part the official histories whisper over. The emperor's desire was not the only thing that decided a concubine's fate. The real game was politics. Every concubine was a potential spy, a pawn sent by rival nobles or even foreign powers. Messages hidden in embroidery, poisons baked into sweetmeats, seduction used as diplomacy. These walls held more state secrets than the emperor's own court. Night in the harem was its own kind of theater. The air thick with incense and anticipation. Concubines knew that the smallest gesture, the tilt of a head, the way their eyes met the emperor's, could decide whether they rose or disappeared. They mastered the art of allure but also the art of survival. And survival here was not about beauty alone. It was about influence, invisible threads pulled in the dark. There were women who learned to weaponize their position, to listen more than they spoke, to slip questions into pillow talk that could extract the emperor's deepest vulnerabilities. These women became shadows within shadows, their smiles concealing daggers sharper than steel. But every dagger cuts both ways. Rival concubines could conspire to ruin another with a single accusation. She has a lover. She is plotting treason. In a world where proof was unnecessary, such a whisper was a death sentence. Then there was the isolation. Imagine a palace so vast you could walk for hours without seeing the same wall twice. Yet you cannot leave. You are surrounded by hundreds of women, yet utterly alone. Every friend could be an enemy, every gift a trap. And in that loneliness the mind begins to twist. Concubines often turn to strange rituals, talismans, and forbidden charms. Desperate for some protection in a world where the emperor's moods were more dangerous than any storm. Some prayed to old gods, some bribed the eunuchs for information, some drank herbal brews to avoid pregnancy. A quiet rebellion against being used as a vessel for imperial heirs. The eunuchs themselves were part of the power structure, not simply guards but informants. They reported on every whispered conversation, every change in demeanor. A misplaced sigh could be interpreted as disloyalty. The harem was a kingdom of masks, where the wrong mask at the wrong time could cost you your life. But the most disturbing truth was this: the emperor's harem was not unique. Across empires, across centuries, the same pattern appears: beauty collected, controlled, and weaponized. The Mughal harem was just one face of a much older, darker system. One that understood the simplest truth of human nature. Control the desires of the ruler and you control the empire. This was why the harem was guarded so fiercely. It wasn't just guarding women, it was guarding power. Every bedchamber was a battlefield, every embrace a negotiation, every kiss a treaty or a trap. And in this silent war, the women who survived longest weren't the most beautiful, but the most cunning. So ask yourself, if history shows us this same pattern again and again, what does that say about the rulers of today? Do you think the cages are gone, or just invisible now? By now you might think you understand the harem, the gold, the silks, the cages. But you don't. Because the true prison wasn't the walls. It was the mind. The harem's design was a masterpiece of psychological control. The women were given luxury but never freedom. They were given rivals but never allies. And most importantly, they were kept in a constant state of uncertainty. You never knew when the emperor would summon you, or ignore you for months. You never knew if the next gift was a sign of love, or a signal that you were being tested. This unpredictability was deliberate. When a person lives in uncertainty, they become easier to manipulate. They cling to the smallest rewards, tolerate greater injustices, and begin to betray each other just to survive. The harem didn't just confine bodies, it rewired minds. And here's the part that should disturb you. This same principle is still used in the world you live in. Keep people in a loop of hope and fear, and they'll police themselves better than any guard could. There were concubines who mastered this psychological game. Women who understood that in a palace of beauty, the rarest jewel was trust. They offered the emperor what no one else dared, honesty, or at least the illusion of it. Some became his confidants, steering political decisions from behind the veil. A suggestion here, a warning there, delivered in the intimacy of the bedchamber, where no minister could interrupt. And yet, even these women were never truly safe. The emperor's favor was a torch that could warm you, or burn you alive. Because in the harem, you could be queen today, and a ghost tomorrow. Poison did not announce itself. It hid in a cup of milk, a slice of melon, a scent of rosewater. And the greatest irony? Many of these deaths were not ordered by the emperor, but by the women themselves, eliminating rivals before rivals eliminated them. Beyond the politics and poison, there was something darker, spiritual decay. Some concubines entered the harem believing they were chosen, blessed. But years in that gilded cage drained them of identity. They became ornaments, moving, breathing, but hollow inside. To keep themselves from collapsing, some clung to faith, praying 5 times a day not just for salvation but for a death that would release them. Others turned to mystics and forbidden rites, smuggling charms into the harem that promised influence over the emperor's heart. A few dabbled in astrology, timing their every move to the stars, believing that fate itself might open the gates that locks never would. But the truth was unavoidable. No magic could undo the fact that their lives belonged to someone else. The harem was also a vault of secrets. Wars were plotted here. Alliances with kingdoms rose and fell on whispers carried from a concubine's lips to the emperor's ear. Foreign envoys understood this, and tried to plant their agents inside the harem. Women disguised as entertainers, dancers, musicians, who could pass along information that would shape the fate of millions. And because the harem was hidden from public eyes, history could be rewritten within these walls. A prince could be declared illegitimate if his mother fell out of favor. An heir could vanish from the line of succession, replaced by another whose mother had more influence. The harem didn't just reflect the empire's politics. It was the empire's politics, wearing a veil of silk. You've heard the saying, history is written by the victors. But here, history was whispered by the concubines. The Mughal harem's power was invisible yet absolute. It worked because it exploited the oldest truths of human nature: desire, fear, ambition. And when you can control those, you can control anything. Now here's where I want you to stop and think, because halfway down this rabbit hole you need to choose. Are you just listening? Or are you seeing? If you've begun to see the patterns, if you understand that the cages of yesterday still exist today only dressed in modern clothes, then write this phrase in the comments twice. The veil is gone. Write it twice, not for me but for yourself. Because once you've named the truth, you can never again pretend you don't see it. And now we go deeper. Because the darkest part of this history has not been told yet. You've seen the luxury. You've seen the poison. You've seen the games played in the emperor's shadow. Now you need to understand, this wasn't a Mughal invention. It was an ancient formula. The harem was just one face of a far older truth, that the control of intimacy is the control of power. In every age, rulers have kept a circle of select, protected, and isolated individuals who could influence their every decision. In the Mughal court, it was concubines. In others, it was advisors, courtiers, or inner circles. The system works because it creates dependency. The ruler begins to need these chosen few, for comfort, for affirmation, for escape from the weight of the crown. And once dependency takes root, influence becomes absolute. In the modern world, you think you're far from this, but look again. Presidents, CEOs, billionaires, they all have inner chambers, though they don't call them harems anymore. You'll hear think tanks, private retreats, executive boards. The structure is the same: isolated access to power, guarded, hidden, controlled. In the Mughal Harem, concubines could make or break military campaigns with a single whispered doubt in the emperor's ear. Today, modern equivalents can shift billions in markets or decide the outcome of wars, not with swords but with data, information, and influence. Do you think it's a coincidence that the most powerful leaders are rarely seen alone, that every public move is choreographed, every private moment shielded? That's the new eunuch wall. Not a line of guards with scimitars, but layers of media, security, and narrative control. The methods of control have evolved, but the psychological principles are exactly the same. Control access. Control environment. Control information. The harem kept outsiders guessing with rumors and spectacle. Today, the modern court uses PR campaigns, distractions, and outrage cycles. The emperor's power is still shaped in private, you just don't get to see the room anymore. Here's a truth most won't dare say: the Mughal concubine system was a weapon that worked in both directions. While the emperor thought he was controlling the women were controlling him. In the modern world, that dynamic is more dangerous. Leaders believe they're at the top, but their dependency makes them puppets. The strings are pulled by those who have private, consistent, and emotional access to them, whether they're partners, advisors, or handlers. The harem trained women to understand the emperor's psychology so intimately that they could steer his moods, influence his decisions, and even plant the seeds of paranoia against his enemies. Today, entire industries exist to study leaders' psychological triggers. Lobbyists, behavioral scientists, strategists, all working to ensure decisions tilt a certain way. The stage is the same. Only the costumes have changed. One of the most chilling aspects of the Mughal harem was its ability to erase people from history. A concubine who bore an heir but fell from favor could see her child's claim erased. Documents rewritten, records destroyed, portraits removed. Now think about the modern era. Scandals vanish from search results. Entire careers disappear after a narrative correction. People who were once celebrated become ghosts overnight, as if they never existed. That's not an accident. It's a refined art, learned over centuries by those who understood that memory is just another battlefield. The harem perfected it in ink and parchment. Today it's done in data and algorithms. By now, you should feel it. The threads connecting the marble corridors of the Mughal harem to the glass towers of today's elite. It's not just history, it's a blueprint. And once you see the blueprint, you can predict the moves before they happen. The question is, will you keep watching or will you turn away? Because from this point forward, the truths get sharper. They cut deeper. And they will change the way you look at every seat of power, every smiling public face, every exclusive circle you'll never be invited into. The Mughal harem wasn't just a prison for women. It was a school, a place where power was studied, perfected, and weaponized for generations. And that weapon has never been put down. Rule 1. Never let the ruler see the whole truth. The emperor believed the harem was his, that every woman was there to serve him. But the concubines knew the deeper reality. They allowed him to believe that. The first lesson of power is this: you don't have to control the throne to control the kingdom. You only need to control the throne's perception. Eunuchs acted as gatekeepers, deciding which concubines were presented to the emperor and when. They also filtered information. If a woman was in danger, the eunuchs could delay her audience, twist her words in translation, or arrange distractions to shift the emperor's attention elsewhere. Today, that same filtering exists, not through marble gates but through media advisors, chiefs of staff, and algorithms. The public thinks they see a leader, but they see only what the gatekeepers allow. Rule 2. Dependency is more powerful than chains. The emperor could have dismissed any woman in the harem with a single command, but he didn't, because he needed them. They fed his ego. They fed his desires. They fed his need for affirmation that he was more than just a ruler, that he was a god in human form. This is the most dangerous form of control, when the master becomes the dependent. In the modern world, leaders are surrounded by circles that feed their needs: emotional, political, psychological. Strip those away and the leader collapses. That's why those who control access to these needs often hold more power than the leader himself. The Mughal concubines mastered this art. The same art is alive today in lobbying networks, financial donors, intelligence handlers, and private counselors. Rule 3. Isolation breeds obedience. No man, not even the most powerful, makes bold decisions in total isolation without eventually bending. The harem ensured the emperor lived in a curated world, shielded from dissent. Any voice that might contradict the harem's influence was silenced or kept far from the palace. That way, the emperor's reality was shaped entirely within those walls. In your world, this is done by surrounding leaders with yes men, controlling their schedules, controlling their environment, and making sure every conversation they have reinforces the same worldview. When you isolate a leader, you don't have to command him. He begins to think like you, because he hears nothing else. Rule 4. Desire is the leash. The harem weaponized the emperor's desires, not just for beauty but for novelty. They understood that the hunger for something new could be redirected into strategic advantage. When a concubine wanted to weaken a rival, she might withhold herself, planting intrigue and longing, making the emperor chase her, while feeding him doubts about another. That longing clouded his judgment. Decisions that should have been made in the council hall were made in the bedroom. In modern politics, desire is no longer just flesh, it's ambition, prestige, approval. The leash is whatever the leader craves most. Control that craving and you control the man. Rule 5. Power must be invisible to survive. The most powerful women in the harem were not the ones who flaunted it. They were the ones who looked harmless, invisible. A dancer who smiled too sweetly. A servant who listened more than she spoke. Their influence was hidden because visibility invites attack. Invisibility invites safety and longevity. Today the same is true. The names you see in headlines are rarely the ones with the deepest power. The true architects stay out of the light, pulling strings where no one can trace them. This is why the harem's legacy still matters. It taught a simple truth. The most dangerous power is the kind you never see coming. And if you've been paying attention, you already know you've seen this blueprint before. Not in marble palaces, but in the boardrooms, the governments, the digital fortresses that rule your world now. There is one truth that every player in the harem eventually learned. Power inside the cage is tolerated only until it becomes dangerous to the one holding the key. When a concubine's influence began to stretch beyond the walls, when she was able to sway not only the emperor but the ministers, the generals, the succession itself, she became a liability. And liabilities in the Mughal court did not retire peacefully. History records these endings in vague terms. She fell ill. She passed unexpectedly. She left the palace. But the reality was quieter and colder. A poisoned cup. A strangled breath behind closed doors. A disappearance so complete that even her name was erased from court records. The harem had no grave markers for these women. Power had to vanish without a trace, not just to remove the threat but to send a message to the others. You are replaceable. The same principle exists today. When someone within the inner circle of modern power becomes unpredictable, uncontrollable, or too ambitious, they are removed, but never in a way that stains the throne. In the modern era, removal takes many forms. A scandal surfaces. Their credibility is shattered overnight. Legal charges appear from nowhere. Their influence collapses as allies mysteriously turn against them. Just like the Mughal harem, the modern system doesn't simply destroy the person. It destroys their narrative. Their story is rewritten so the public sees them not as a threat that was neutralized, but as someone who deserved to fall. Some of the most cunning concubines in the harem knew this rule and prepared for it. They planted alliances outside the emperor's control, kept secrets that could be used as leverage, and hid wealth in ways that even the imperial treasurers couldn't trace. They understood something most people still don't. Survival at the highest levels of power requires exit doors, invisible escape routes. Today the same applies. Those in modern elite circles who survive for decades do so because they have multiple lifelines, private wealth, hidden allies, insurance in the form of secrets too dangerous to expose. The harem's survivors understood that the only true safety is to make yourself too costly to destroy. But make no mistake, even the most prepared can fall. The Mughal harem saw entire factions wiped out in a single night. If a favored concubine was accused of plotting against the emperor, her allies were purged, her servants executed, her quarters burned. This wasn't just punishment, it was narrative control. By erasing every trace of her, the court could pretend she had never existed. Without memory there is no martyr. Without martyrdom there is no rebellion. The modern world does the same but with data. Entire histories vanish from the public record with a keystroke. Search for them and you'll find nothing, as if they were a dream you imagined. That's the digital version of burning the concubine's quarters. The harem's purges reveal an uncomfortable truth. The system will tolerate corruption, cruelty, and manipulation. But it will not tolerate loss of control. It is not morality that determines survival, it is obedience. The concubines who played the game without threatening the throne could live in comfort until their final breath. But the ones who reached too far, who began to act as if they were equal to the emperor, they were erased. And that same line still exists today. It doesn't matter how talented, wealthy, or connected you are. The moment you forget who holds the key to the cage, the system will remind you. Harshly, quietly, permanently. The question you should be asking yourself is this. If the harem's cage was made of marble, what is today's cage made of? And more importantly, who's really holding the key now? Surviving the Mughal harem was not the same as living. Those who made it to old age carried scars that could not be seen. Imagine waking every day knowing that your life depends on a man's mood, that every word, every glance, every silence could be twisted against you. Imagine years of smiling when you wanted to scream, of dressing in beauty while feeling hollow inside. By the time some women were finally free, if they ever were, they could no longer imagine a world beyond the cage. Even in gardens open to the public, they still walked as if watched. Even in safety, they still chose their words like weapons might be waiting. This was the harem's final victory, not in the marble corridors but in the minds of those who lived there. The psychological conditioning was deliberate. Isolation made them dependent. Rivalry made them suspicious. Rewards kept them compliant. Over time, this rewired their instincts. They learned to anticipate danger before it appeared. They read the emperor's expressions like soldiers read the weather before battle. And when the emperor was gone, they did the same with every man who came after. But here's the hidden cruelty. Those instincts, once useful in the cage, became chains outside it. Trust was impossible. Peace felt dangerous. Even freedom felt like a trick. Now look at the modern elite. The people at the top of politics, finance, and entertainment live in the same invisible tension. They move through a world where every conversation could be recorded, every friend could be a rival, every gift could come with a hook. They live in mansions instead of harems, but the psychological walls are the same. They cannot speak freely. They cannot move without security. They cannot truly trust anyone. And just like the concubines, they adapt, learning to smile while calculating, to laugh while guarding, to give warmth while keeping their soul behind a locked door. There is another layer to the conditioning, the constant presence of beauty and luxury. In the harem, silks and jewels dulled the sense of captivity. In the modern world, it's private jets, exclusive parties, and designer everything. The cage becomes easier to accept when it glitters. But the glitter has a purpose. It distracts from the truth that you are not free. In fact, it works even better than chains. A prisoner who thinks he's living in paradise will never try to escape. This is why the harem was so effective. It didn't just lock doors, it locked minds. And perhaps the most dangerous part of this conditioning is that it can be passed down. In the Mughal court, daughters raised inside the harem learned the rules before they understood them. When to speak, when to bow, when to disappear. They inherited the survival patterns of their mothers. In the modern elite, the same inheritance happens. Children born into wealth and influence are raised inside invisible walls, guarded schools, curated friendships, scripted public lives. They are taught the rules of survival in a cage they can't even see. And so, the cycle never ends. The marble halls may have crumbled centuries ago, but the harem still exists. It just learned to hide in plain sight. You think the emperor's harem was just silk and perfume? You're wrong. In truth, it was a laboratory of power, a place where men and women were stripped of their past and rebuilt into tools for the empire's will. The concubines who survived long enough to matter learned something the outside world never taught: how to weaponize beauty, and when to bury it. They watched other women die from envy's poison, sometimes literally. A glance that lasted too long, a whisper that reached the wrong ear, could mean being transferred to a section of the palace from which no one returned. They called it the Dark Wing. The women who vanished there became nothing more than ghost stories, told in shaking voices over the dim light of an oil lamp. Yet the most terrifying truth wasn't the fear of death. It was the knowledge that the emperor himself could forget your existence overnight, erasing you without lifting a sword. Every night, the walls of the harem absorbed the confessions of women who had learned too much. Servants spoke of secret pregnancies, of babies born in silence and taken before the mothers ever held them. What? Because in the game of dynastic blood, a child was not a blessing, it was a weapon. And if that weapon wasn't sanctioned by the emperor's will, it was destroyed before it could draw breath. Some concubines hid their swelling bellies behind layers of embroidered cloth, their smiles painted on like the frescoes above their heads, knowing full well that the moment a guard noticed, the executioner's shadow would fall over their door. The Mughals didn't just control women's bodies, they controlled the future. Here's something they never write in history books. Some concubines, desperate to survive, turned into predators themselves. They learned the art of slow poisoning, not just with herbs but with words. A single, well-placed rumor could end a rival faster than any dagger. They whispered in the ears of eunuchs, they planted doubts in the mind of the emperor himself. Over time, the harem became less like a home and more like a court of assassins. Only the weapons were laughter, perfume, and glances that cut like steel. And outside, in the marble courts, the empire still shone, oblivious to the venom flowing in its most private chambers. But the true masters of the harem's game were not the most beautiful, they were the most invisible. These women avoided the emperor's gaze, stayed silent when others boasted, and waited for their moment. They understood that power was a patient creature, and that the empire was always hungry for a new favorite. One such woman, whose name is buried under centuries of dust, rose from the lowest rank to the position of chief consort, without ever once asking for it. Oh. She studied every whisper, every sigh, every look the emperor gave to other women, and learned how to be the only voice he couldn't forget in the silence. By the end, the harem was no longer a palace of pleasure, it was a vault of secrets. Each concubine carried stories that could ruin dynasties, topple generals, and expose the lies written in marble. But secrets are dangerous currency. Too much knowledge and the very walls that sheltered you would become your tomb. Some say there are still hidden chambers beneath the ruins of the Mughal forts, filled with the belongings of women who vanished. Jewelry still tangled in silk, letters written in trembling hands, perfumes that have long lost their scent. These were not just ornaments of the court, they were witnesses to an empire's darkest heartbeat, and the echoes of their voices still rattle in the stones. But the true nightmare of the harem was not in the bruises or the chains, it was in the breaking of identity. Every concubine was stripped of her name. A girl named Amina in a distant village might now be called Gulbaden, or Soraya, or simply the Pale One. These names were chosen not for meaning but for erasure. The court wanted no memory to survive that could tie a woman back to a family, a place, or a past life. And here's the darkness that most historians gloss over. This wasn't just about obedience. It was about turning human beings into artifacts. If you control a person's name, you control their destiny. In ancient mysticism, the name is the key to the soul. Erase the key and you own the lock. That's what the Mughals understood better than their rivals. Slavery of the flesh was temporary, but slavery of identity was forever. Whispers among the concubines told of women who forgot their original names after years in the harem. When asked, they would pause, staring into the air like trying to hear an echo that no longer existed. Some cried silently in the night, afraid not of death, but of the day they'd wake up and not remember they had ever been someone else. In those moments, the Mughal harem stopped being a gilded prison and became something far worse, a place where reality itself bent around the will of the emperor. You could feel it in the way the air hung heavy, in the silence that followed certain footsteps, in the way even the most defiant women eventually folded their spirit like an old parchment. And once the spirit folds, it never unfolds the same way again. Beyond the marble walls, the empire saw the harem as a place of beauty, music, and luxury. Poets sang of silken veils fluttering in scented gardens, of moonlit nights filled with laughter and song. But those songs never told of the women who stood in the shadows, watching the moonlight fall on bars they could never cross. The Mughals were masters of appearances. The emperor's court needed the harem to be a symbol of power, of wealth, of divine right. To admit its cruelty would be to admit that their empire was built on the same chains they claimed to break. And so, the truth was locked away along with the women who lived it. But truth has a way of leaking through. It escaped in coded verses, in strange paintings, in the sudden disappearance of favored courtesans who had fallen ill, but whose bodies were never seen again. It hid in the fear of eunuchs who served both as guards and prisoners themselves. Some women learned to survive by becoming invisible, never speaking unless spoken to, never resisting, never loving. Others survived by weaponizing beauty and charm, turning the emperor's gaze into a shield. But all knew one thing: survival was not freedom. It was merely endurance, and endurance was the currency of the harem. There are stories, rare, almost whispered like ghost tales, of escape. One tells of a woman named Zuleika who disguised herself as a eunuch during a palace festival and slipped into the streets of Agra under the cover of fireworks. Another speaks of two sisters, captured from the Deccan, who stole a guard's keys and fled on horseback into the desert, never to be seen again. But for every escape there were hundreds of failed attempts. Women caught trying to flee faced punishments so cruel they became cautionary tales for the rest. Sometimes it was exile to a harsher, deeper harem in a remote fort. Sometimes it was a public shaming in the emperor's court. And sometimes, the punishment was simply disappearance. No one ever spoke of those who vanished. The harem taught you quickly, questions were dangerous and curiosity could kill. By the late Mughal period, the harem had grown so vast that it was a city within a city. It had its own rules, its own markets, even its own spies. Every woman was both watched and watching. Friendship could be a comfort, or a trap. Confide in the wrong person and your words could be sold to a rival concubine, a scheming noble, or even the emperor himself. It was a chessboard where every piece was alive, and every move could cost you your life. Some concubines became power brokers, controlling gifts, favors, and even imperial decisions. But the higher they climbed, the more dangerous the fall. Power in the harem was like holding a torch in a room full of silk curtains, brilliant, but one wrong move and everything burned. Centuries later, the marble walls of the Mughal harem still stand in ruins, open to tourists. Visitors walk through the empty courtyards, imagining a world of romance and intrigue. They take photographs beneath carved arches, unaware of the ghosts that may still linger in the shadows. But if you stand there long enough, when the crowds thin and the wind carries the faint scent of roses, you might feel it. Not the grandeur, not the beauty, but the quiet, suffocating weight of 1,000 stolen lives. Because the harem was never just about desire. It was about possession. It was about control so complete that even history struggled to set the women free. And perhaps, that's why their stories still whisper through the stones. Not begging to be heard, but warning us to listen.